Hello and welcome for Technical Thursday. So what I planned on doing today is we're going to start on the last four rows of the second section. So we're going to be doing rows 35, 36, 37, and 38 to complete that and get that done. Before we do that, I did want to take a break and just take a look at some of the options within Stitch Fiddle and how I manage some of my charts and how I build them. And the main thing with that is taking time to calculate my gauge. I'll count how many stitches and rows I could do in a 4x4 square, either on one of my blankets or doing a test squash. And what that does is in Stitch Fiddle is you're able to go in and let me actually go to the file. There we go. So under chart settings, you're gonna have a option here to adjust your gauge. So right now I do, they are very rectangles, so it's going to be twice the number of stitches I can do across the width as height. So that's going to be where we get this very tall and rectangular stitch gauge. So if you look, you can tell that, yeah, the one stitch is going to be about twice as high as it is wide. So what that does mainly when you're building your chart is that is not going to be square. So it's going to be really important to build out um, the direction. So if you're going horizontally, you're going to be, a higher width score than height. If you were to run the actual row vertically, so on some of my projects, I run, from top to bottom corner, and then I work, the rows right to left, so it builds out that way. That would mean that the width is the height of the stitch, so it's going to be half of what the height is, if that makes sense. So when I calculate, if I run those rows vertically on those projects, I make sure that I basically turn the rectangle stitch in that direction. So if I was to do that with this particular project, you're going to notice something immediately. So what I did here is I condensed the vertical row into my stitches. And so you can see that instead of running vertical, like the stitch being twice as high as it is wide, now it is half as wide as it is tall, kind of thing. So and it actually squishes that. If I were to run this, vertically, it would actually squish the heart and kind of condense the pattern that way. So, you know, I would have to actually like rotate the chart 90 degrees and then adjust the gauge in order to make it look right. So just as an example, let's see if we can play around with that. If your gauge is square, like if you don't do the back loop only, you don't run into these issues. Let's see if we can play around with it. So now, edit chart, there we go. I rotate it like that. And then adjust it. Let's see what it does. So kind of if you counteract that way and run these rows vertically, that would be another way to do it if you absolutely like the idea of running it vertically that way. And then obviously the hearts are going to be layered on top of each other versus horizontal next to each other. Um, that way. So just things to think about if you're ever making your own charts, especially if you're trying to get these diagonals to work out. I think that was the hardest thing for me was, playing around like how do I get a nice line right here without making it look crazily elongated. Um, Things like that, like in order to get this square, yes, it's 5 stitches across, but only 3 rows high. This one's 11 by 7. They look fairly reasonable to the eye, very squarish. So it's not perfect, but It does, play around with it, so that's why I, added a kind of just a motif block to have this ready to go since I already built it once. I don't have to build it again. And I can kind of expand that template out when I do other blogs. So just, yeah, ideas of if you're interested in making your own charts or using Stitch Fiddle, those are the options. If you're wondering how I adjust for going vertically versus horizontally, it's just playing with that gauge, knowing that my stitches are rectangle and not horizontal. So I'm going to go ahead and get started on row 35 on this project. So we're going to do, again, the last 4 rows of this section. It'll be exciting to get done, and I'll see you in the next one.